We all loved the Transformers in the 80s, but they weren't the only hot transforming toy back then. There was another. Welcome to Rewind Toys. I'm your host, Jason Emmett, and today we're going to be talking about Tonka's lower-end Transformers, the GoBots. Personally, I was a fan of the GoBots, and in all fairness, they predated the Transformers by like a year, finding their way to the toy shelves in 1983 and running initially until 1987. So it all started with, you guessed it, a Japanese company named Poppy, who were at the time a part of Bandai. They were a line called Machine Robo, and originally were mechs piloted by humans, or maybe. Honestly, they didn't much care. You see, in Japan, transforming toys sold just fine without any real storyline. At any rate, Tonka licensed them, decided we didn't need no stinking humans, and chose to make them sentient. Similar to Transformers, only different. So in the early 80s, Japan decides it wants to get into the U.S. toy market and releases Godaiken. The problem was they were expensive and had zero backstory for American kids to latch onto. In the end, they didn't sell well. Now we move to Poppy and Bandai, who have released the Machine Robo toys, smaller, more affordable, and again, no real backstory. Now they're doing well in Japan, and Bandai thinks we can bring this line to America. And so they do. They're called Machine Men. These were GoBots without the GoBot name and without the GoBot story, and it failed. So that's when Bandai decides they need to partner with Tonka, a company known for its toy trucks. They re-released the same toys with new packaging and, of course, a cartoon. Now, the GoBots are around 2 inches tall, not nearly as complex as those other transforming robots that we mentioned earlier, and quite a bit more affordable as well. They came in 2 factions, the Friendly Guardians and the Enemy Renegades, and we'll further discuss these lines, the good guys and the bad guys, but first, let's do their origin story. This was an 80s toy, and we mentioned the cartoon, so let's chat about that. Animated by Hanna-Barbera, Challenge of the GoBots ran 2 seasons, 65 episodes. The inhabitants of planet Gobatron have been locked in civil war since the Renegades arose trying to take over. The Renegades end up causing the planet to go defenseless, and then an asteroid collides with it, and that's pretty much the end of everything. The inhabitants, called Go Beings, are forced to place their brains into mechanical bodies in order to survive. Now, eventually, the battle finds its way to Earth, and boom, we have the GoBots. This is actually a really dark but kind of cool story within the story that allows for some great sci-fi, especially considering it was a kid's show. The synopsis I just gave doesn't really even break the surface, but we don't want to get too deep in the cartoon. In the first run of GoBots, there were just over 70 different toys released. Cars, trucks, tanks, planes, and more. The Guardians leader was a plane named Leader 1. The Renegades leader was a motorcycle named Cykill. Some of the more notable, for me anyway, were Spacey, which was a space shuttle. There was Screwhead, this drilling robot. Scooter, Scooter. Jeeper Creeper was a Jeep. Pathfinder was a flying saucer. And then there was Sparky the Fiero, which was, you couldn't get much more 80s than that. We also had the Super GoBots, which were giant versions, probably 3 to 4 inches taller than the OGs. There were, I believe, 19 of those released. In 1985, we had the Power Warriors, 2 giant bots made up of several power suits. In similar fashion, we had the Puzzler and Monstrous, which each had 6 bots that combined to form. Combining robots was a big thing in the 80s. Voltron and Devastator. We had a lot of them. There were 2 released under the Boomers line, 2 Power Marchers, 3 Dread Launchers, and 3 Secret Riders. We also had a Command Center, the GoBot Fortress, a giant snake truck called Scales, the Thruster playset, the mail-in Zod figure, and the Space Hawk spaceship. So you can see there was a large run of different GoBots and GoBot accoutrements. Now, they weren't very articulate. In their vehicle form, they were roughly the size of a Hot Wheel or a Matchbox, and in robot form, you could typically move their arms up and down. But unlike most of the Transformers, they could actually stand up on their own. So a year later, Transformers was released, and their cars were more intricate and articulate, and they pretty much dominated the market. And it caused a little friction between kids who, and I know because I lived through this, I remember it, through kids who were like, no, I'm Transformers, no, I'm GoBots. Me, I was like, I like them all. I think they're great. So whatever. What I can say is Transformers, guys, Transformers, they never had the Rock Lords. 1986 Challenge of the GoBots ends, and a new feature film is released to theaters. GoBots Battle of the Rock Lords. This was a new spin to the story, telling of a race of transforming rocks that crashed into Gobotron. These Rock Lords are being hunted by Magmar, who is killing them off in order to steal their power scepters to give himself all of their power. Yes, they released figures, and yes, they transformed into rocks, which couldn't really do anything. But yes, they looked cool, and I wanted all of them. They came with weapons, mini comics, and they were textured to look like really cool rocks. They included additional lines like action shock rocks that had mechanical actions. There were Roxors, which were dinosaurs instead of humanoid robots. There were Gnarlies, which were these furry little creatures. Jewel Lords, which looked like jewels and were really cool. There were 2 vehicles and 1 fossil lord. Now, I've tried counting them all up, and I believe there's an even 40 in total, which does include 2 European exclusive versions. There were also 6 Wendy's GoBot figures you could buy for $1 each. We would be remiss if we didn't mention those. After the Hasbro buyout in 1991, they were sort of integrated into the Transformers. Sort of. You see, Hasbro owns the characters' names, their bios, their backstories, but the actual toys, their molds, things like that, they weren't covered in the acquisition, so they can't release them looking the way they once did. There was a 93 figure named GoBot that was released, and a few 95 GoBots figures, but they were just Matchbox-size versions of existing Transformers. There was also a 95 BotCon exclusive Night Racer and a 2007 BotCon repainted Bumblebee named Bugbite, who was a Volkswagen GoBot. I was at that BotCon, and I remember talking about him with a friend and how cool he looked. In 2002, Playskool, a Hasbro subsidiary, released Transformers GoBots. These bear no real resemblance to the originals at all, though. So will we ever get to see a re-release of these toys? I mean, who knows? With Bandai owning the characters' molds, it would mean Hasbro would have to pay to license them. Would it be worth it? I think it probably would be. Release a limited line at a decent price, and collectors, they're going to buy them. I know there was a huge hate-on for GoBots after Transformers came out. Like I said, I was never one of those as a kid. I liked both lines, and I appreciated what each line did and what each line was for. Now, you can find these fun little figures in the usual places, such as eBay, but be warned, their original $4 price tag, it is no more. In my searches, I saw loose figures going for closer to $15 to $20, somewhere in that range. And carded figures, they're around $70 or $80. And the combining bots, again, this would be in box, upwards to $270 and $300. Of course, numbers change all the time, and you never know what you might stumble upon at a yard sale or flea market, so keep your eyes peeled. So anyway, leave me a comment. Were you guys GoBot fans? If so, which was your favorite, and do you think Hasbro should do a limited re-release of any of these? Drop a comment, and make sure to blast that subscribe button while you're down there. Until next time, guys, this has been Rewind Toys. I am Jason Emmett, and remember, when it comes to retro toys, the hunt, well, that's half the fun.